Clara grabbed Ethan Greer's arm in the middle of Main Street and held on. She had been in redemption 3 days. She had knocked on 14 doors. She had 40 cents left in the handkerchief at her waist, and a name that meant nothing to anyone in Wyoming territory. Every person on that street had watched her knock on those 14 doors and fail, and not one of them had moved an inch to help. So she grabbed the arm of the man the whole town crossed the street to avoid, and she said it loud enough for God and every soul in redemption to hear at once. "Please, marry me." If this story puts something in your chest that you haven't felt in a while, something that reminds you of your own roads and your own doors, drop a comment and tell me what city you're watching from today. I want to know how far this story travels. And if you haven't subscribed yet, stay with me until the end. What Clara does next, and what Ethan Greer says back to her, is something I promise you will not forget. The street went silent, the way a room goes silent when something irreversible has just happened. Ethan Greer stopped walking. He looked down at the hand on his arm. Small, bare, no glove, knuckles red from cold. And then he looked at the woman it belonged to. She was shaking. She was trying very hard not to show it. Jaw set, chin up, eyes steady on his face. But her hand on his arm was shaking, and he could feel it through the leather of his jacket. "Ma'am?" His voice was low and careful. "You'd best let go." "I'll let go when you've heard me out." Clara Ames did not let go. "My name is Clara Ames. I came from Lowell, Massachusetts, on a legitimate employment offer that turned out to be a fraud. I have been in this town 3 days. I have knocked on every door on this street. I have 40 cents, a suitcase, and no place to sleep tonight." She held his eyes. "I am not asking for love. I am not asking for anything a woman ought to be ashamed to ask. I am asking for a roof and a name, and I am offering fair work in return. Cook, clean, keep accounts, mend, whatever is needed. I am useful, Mr. Greer, and I am not going to stand on the street another night and pretend I am not." Behind her, someone on the boardwalk said something low, a woman's voice. Then a second voice answered. Ethan heard them. His eyes flicked past Clara for just a moment, something quick and flat in his expression, and the voices stopped. He looked back at her. "How do you know my name?" he said. "I asked the livery boy who you were when you came out of the saloon." Clara finally released his arm. She straightened her cuffs. "He told me your name, turned white, and walked away before I could ask anything else. I took that as useful information." "Useful," Ethan repeated. "It told me you mattered to this town, one way or another. People don't go white over men who don't matter." A long silence. The chestnut horse beside him shifted its weight and blew steam into the cold air. "Mrs. Gill," Ethan raised his voice. Not loud, not even close to shouting, but it carried across the street with the particular quality of a voice accustomed to being obeyed. "I believe you have something to say." Clara turned. On the boardwalk in front of the boarding house, a tall woman in a gray dress stood with her arms crossed and her mouth already open. Nora Gill was 60 years old and had the expression of a woman who had been waiting for an invitation to speak since approximately 1869. "I have plenty to say," Mrs. Gill said. She came down off the boardwalk and stopped 5 feet from Clara. "I already told this young woman this morning that I don't take in single women traveling alone. You want to know why? Because the last one Gerald Poe brought into this town ended up a widow before she was even properly a wife, and the one before that we buried in January." Her eyes cut to Clara. "You want to know what redemption does with women who come here alone and desperate, miss? It uses them up." "That's a thorough warning," Clara said. "Have you got a room or not?" Mrs. Gill blinked. That was clearly not the response she had prepared for. "I told you this morning. You told me you didn't take in single women traveling alone. I'm asking if you have a room. I'll be neither single nor traveling alone if Mr. Greer says yes. The silence on Main Street had taken on a different quality. It was no longer the silence of people holding their breath. It was the silence of people who had stopped whatever they were doing to watch. Mrs. Gill looked at Ethan Greer. Something moved in her face. Not fear exactly, but the cousin of fear. The careful respect paid to things a person didn't fully understand. "Ethan Greer," she said, "you take this woman out to that cabin and the whole town will talk." "The whole town already talks," Ethan said. "Hasn't hurt me yet." He looked at Clara. "You said you keep accounts." 8 years, Lowell Textile. Before that, 2 years for a shipping firm in Boston. You know land records, deeds, transfers, title documents? Clara paused for just a moment. I know financial records. A deed is a financial document. Something shifted in Ethan's expression. Barely there, but Clara was a woman trained to see small movements in columns of numbers, and she saw it. "There's a diner on 2nd Street," he said. "Hattie's. You go in, you tell her I sent you. She'll feed you. I'll be there in 20 minutes. He handed her the horse's reins. "Take him to the post. Don't let him bite you." "Does he bite?" "Not usually, but he doesn't know you yet." Clara took the reins. The horse turned one large dark eye toward her and considered. She looked back at it steadily. It looked away first. She heard Mrs. Gill say something sharp and quiet to Ethan as she walked away, and she heard Ethan say nothing in return. Hattie's smelled of coffee and rendered fat and old wood. 4 tables, a counter, a wood stove putting out serious heat, and an old woman behind the counter who looked up when Clara came in and looked back down again at whatever she was frying without changing her expression at all. "He sent me," Clara said. Hattie set a cup on the counter. "Sit anywhere." Clara chose the table in the back corner, facing the door. She wrapped both hands around the cup when it came and tried to remember the last time she'd been warm. The coffee was strong enough to stand a spoon in. She drank it and watched the door. Ethan came in at exactly 20 minutes. He sat across from her without taking off his hat and said, "Tell me what happened." She told him. The advertisement in the Denver Post. Position available, Redemption Land Office, Wyoming Territory. Salary, $12 monthly. Respectable boarding arranged. Inquiries to Gerald Poe. Address given, care of the Redemption Post Office. The letters. 5 of them over 3 months. Each one precise and professional. Written on paper with the official Territorial Land Office seal at the top. The instructions to wire her first month's salary as a good faith deposit to hold the position, which she had done, $41. Everything she had saved in 2 years of working after Daniel died, and the bills were paid. Gerald Poe, who did not exist. The land office, which had no record of him. The Western Union clerk, who was very sorry. She said all of it in the flat, controlled voice she had developed for delivering information she could not afford to feel while she was delivering it. And Ethan listened without interrupting, his hands flat on the table in front of him, his eyes on her face. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "The letters," he said. "You still have them?" "In my suitcase." "The seal on the letterhead. Describe it." Clara closed her eyes, pulled up the image the way she pulled up numbers. Eagle with wings extended, words around the border. Wyoming Territory, Office of Land Records. Below the eagle, a banner. I'd have to see it again to give you the exact wording. Ethan's jaw tightened briefly. Gone in a second. When was the first letter? July. The last one came in September. And the wire, which office did you send it through? Lowell Western Union. Destination, Redemption. Recipient, Gerald Poe. Ethan picked up his coffee cup and looked into it, and set it down without drinking. Gerald Poe cleared out of Redemption in August, he said. Whatever address he gave for the wire was forwarded. The money never came through this office. So it's gone. Gone, he said. Clara nodded. She had known that since Thursday morning. She had already grieved it as much as she intended to grieve it. You said something on the street about keeping land records, deeds, and transfers. Ethan said nothing. That wasn't a casual question, Clara said. You weren't checking whether I was qualified to cook. You were checking whether I was qualified for something specific. She looked at him across the table. What is it? He looked back at her for a long time. He had the particular stillness of a man who made no movement he hadn't already decided on. How long have you got before you need an answer about the room? He said. Clara understood that the subject was closed for now. She had worked long enough with men who held their cards to know when she was looking at a man mid-calculation. How long are you offering me? She said. Long enough to finish the coffee. She wrapped her hands back around the cup. Then I've got that long, she said. He told her about the cabin the same way he told her everything. Flat, minimal, factual. 2 miles north. 3 rooms. 2nd bedroom, door with a bolt. She could throw it and he would not ask questions. Kitchen was functional. Well water was good. He was gone most of the day and some nights. He expected meals when he was in, and the house kept clean, in exchange for which she would have the room and $10 a month. I am not, he said, and his voice went very quiet and very deliberate, looking for a wife in any way you might have heard that word used. I want that said plainly. Good, Clara said, because I meant what I said on the street. I need a name and a roof. I didn't say anything about love. She looked at him. I was married. His name was Daniel. He died 2 years ago in a mill fire that should never have happened. I'm still not done being angry about it. She took a drink of coffee. I don't have room for anything else right now. Something in Ethan's face, just around the eyes, changed in a way she couldn't name. Mill fire, he said. Lowell, November 1882. The investigation called it accidental. You don't believe that? I kept the company's books, Clara said. I know what they'd been cutting back on for 2 years. Safety equipment mainly. Silence. The wood stove popped. A man came in the front door of Hattie's, saw Ethan Greer sitting at the back table, and left. Neither of them acknowledged it. We leave in an hour, Ethan said. He stood, dropped coins on the table, and walked out. Clara sat alone with her coffee for a moment. She thought about the man who had just left. She thought about the way he'd asked about the land record seal on the letterhead, specific and immediate, the way a person asked about something they already had a picture of in their head. She thought about the way his jaw had tightened when she described it. She thought, he already knew about Gerald Poe. He knew before she said a word. She picked up her valise and went to get her suitcase from where she'd left it at the livery. The cabin was 3 rooms and a story and a half, tucked against the base of a ridge with a creek she could hear but not yet see running somewhere to the north. She walked through it while Ethan put the horse up, moving room to room without hurrying. The kitchen first. Iron stove, work table, shelves with flour and salt and coffee, and a row of canning jars. Functional, as he'd said. The main room. A table and 2 chairs and a desk against the far wall. She stopped at the desk. It was covered in documents. Not scattered, stacked, organized, each pile held with a flat riverstone. She could see from where she stood that they were land records of some kind. Deed-sized paper, with the territorial seal at the top, numbers and dates in neat columns. At least 30 pages, maybe more. She did not touch them. She stood there and looked at them, and then she went to the 2nd bedroom. The bolt on the door was new. The hardware was bright, no rust, the wood around the screws still pale and unweathered. It had been installed recently. Not for her. She had been in town 3 days, and she doubted Ethan Greer had known about her existence before she grabbed his arm this morning. For someone else, then, or in expectation of someone. She stood in the doorway of that room for a moment, looking at the new bolt and thinking about a man who prepared a room with a working lock before the woman who needed it arrived. She put her suitcase under the bed, hung her spare dress on the peg, set Daniel's photograph on the windowsill. She went to the kitchen and started on supper. Ethan came in from the barn when the smell of onions and salt pork had been working for 20 minutes. He stopped in the kitchen doorway. He looked at the stove, the pot, Clara standing with her back to him and a wooden spoon in her hand, and something moved across his face that he shut down quickly. "There's a basin if you want to wash up," Clara said without turning around. "I found it under the counter." He washed up. They ate. He ate without comment and without leaving anything in the bowl, which she took as its own kind of approval. After the dishes were cleared, Clara sat across from him and said, "The document's on your desk." He looked up from his coffee. "Land records," she said. "Deed transfers. At least 30 pages organized by someone who knew what they were doing." She set her hands flat on the table. "I'm telling you I saw them because I want you to know I noticed, and I want you to know I did not read them. That was a choice, not an accident. When you're ready to tell me what they are, I'll be here." She stood and picked up her cup. "Good night, Mr. Greer." She went to her room. She threw the bolt. She lay on the bed in the dark and listened to the sounds of the cabin, the wind outside, coming down off the ridge with a low, steady voice. The creek somewhere past the north wall, talking over its stones. And in the main room, the sound of the desk chair pulling out, the quiet shuffle of paper. A man working through something in the dark by lamplight. Something he had clearly been working through for a long time, alone. She thought about the new bolt on the door. She thought about the way he'd asked about the land office seal. She thought about 30 pages of organized documents, and a man the whole town feared to look at, and a fraud scheme that had brought 7 women to redemption from back east. She thought about Daniel, about the safety equipment budget, and the fire, and the investigation that called it accidental. She thought, someone in this town has been doing something for a long time and getting away with it. And the man in the next room knows it. She thought, I spent 8 years reading what was hidden in other people's numbers. I found it every time. I just never had anyone willing to do anything with what I found. The papers rustled. The lamp in the main room stayed lit. The wind came down off the ridge and moved through the grass outside with a sound like a long, slow exhale. Clara Ames stared at the ceiling in the dark and felt, for the first time in 2 years, like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. She did not know yet what it was going to cost her, but she had already paid the highest price she had to pay, and she was still here, still standing, still reading the numbers. Whatever came next, she was ready. She was at the desk before he woke up. Clara had not planned it that way. She had lain in the dark until the lamp in the main room went out and the cabin went quiet. And then she had lain there another hour, listening to the wind in the creek and the particular silence of a house with one other person in it. And somewhere around 3 a.m, she had stopped pretending she was going to sleep and got up. The documents were right where they had been. 32 pages, she counted now, organized into 4 stacks, with the river stones holding them flat. She did not move the stones. She pulled the lamp close, turned it up, and bent over the first stack with her hands behind her back, reading without touching, the way she had learned to do in the mill office when she needed to see something without leaving evidence that she had seen it. The first page was a deed transfer. Parcel 14, Section 7, Crockett County, Wyoming Territory. Transferred from one James Arthur Hollis to the Redemption Land Development Company on the 14th of March, 1882. Signed by the County Land Registrar. Witnessed, sealed. Clara read it twice. Then she read it a third time. Then she carefully lifted the river stone from the second stack and began reading through from the top. She did not hear Ethan's door open. She did not hear his boots on the floor. The first she knew he was there was when he spoke from directly behind her left shoulder. "You throw the bolt, and then you pick my lock." Clara did not jump. She straightened slowly and turned around. He was dressed, or close to it, boots on, shirt on but not buttoned at the collar, hair not yet settled under the hat he was holding in one hand. He had clearly been awake a while before he came out. His eyes were sharp and fully present. "I didn't touch anything," Clara said. "I moved one stone. I'll put it back." "I can see you moved it." He looked at the desk, then at her. "What did you find?" "What did I find? Or what do I think I found?" "Both." Clara turned back to the desk. She pointed at the first stack. "Deed transfers. 14 of them, all recording land changing hands from private individuals to something called the Redemption Land Development Company. Dates ranging from March 1882 to June of this year." She moved her finger to the second stack. "These are the originals, or they're meant to look like originals. Same parcels, same dates, same registrar seal." She looked at him over her shoulder. "Except they're not the same." Ethan came to stand beside her at the desk. He was close enough that she could feel the warmth off him in the cold of the early morning. "Show me." "Here." She pointed at the first transfer document, and then its corresponding page in the second stack. "Parcel 14, James Hollis. Same parcel number, same transfer date, same registrar signature. But the acreage is different. The original records 320 acres. The copy records 280. 40 acres missing. 40 acres added somewhere else, most likely." Clara pointed to the third stack. "I haven't read those yet." Ethan reached past her and picked up the top page from the third stack. He held it in the lamplight. His jaw set. He set it back down. "The 40 acres were transferred to Parcel 22 in a separate transaction," he said. 8 months later. Sold at full market rate to a private buyer. "Who?" Ethan looked at her. He had the expression of a man deciding how much weight a floor would hold before he put his full weight on it. "A man named Harlan Voss." Clara filed the name. "The lawyer." "Among other things." Ethan set down the page and stepped back from the desk. He put on his hat. "How long did it take you to see the discrepancy?" "In the acreage? About 4 minutes." Clara put the riverstone back on the second stack, precisely where it had been. "If I had the original land office registry to cross-reference, I could map every altered document in this pile in under 2 hours." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "There's a coffee pot on the stove," he said, "and a half a corn pone left from yesterday." "I'll make breakfast." "You don't have to." "Mr. Greer." Clara picked up the lamp and turned it down. "I have just read 32 pages of what appears to be systematic land fraud conducted against at least 14 families in this county. I need hot coffee, and I need to think. And making breakfast is how I think. So I'm going to make breakfast." She went to the kitchen. She heard him stand at the desk for another moment, then follow. They ate in the way they had the night before, quietly, without performance. But the quality of the quiet had changed. It was the quiet of two people thinking about the same thing from different angles, and both of them knowing it. 14 families, Clara said, when her plate was half cleared. These are real people. Yes. Some of them still in the county? Some. Ethan wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. Some left. Couldn't afford to fight it, and couldn't afford to stay once the land was gone. Ed Carpenter took his family to Nebraska 2 years ago. Sarah Pruitt, widow, had a boy of 12. She's still in town, works the laundry on First Street. Clara thought of the laundry on First Street. She had knocked on that door yesterday. The woman who answered had looked at her with the particular tired eyes of someone who had been disappointed recently and often. She had said they weren't hiring. She knows what happened to her land, Clara said. She knows it was taken. She doesn't know how yet. He paused. She knows enough to be afraid of Voss, but not enough to fight him. You can't fight what you can't prove. Ethan set down his cup. The altered records are filed at the county land office. Officially legal. Officially verified. Anyone who challenges them gets told the documents are in order and the transfer was legitimate. And if they persist, they find themselves looking at a lawyer's letter about the legal consequences of making false accusations against a county official. Clara looked at him across the table. You have 32 pages of evidence that the documents are not in order. I have 32 pages of copies that I pulled from the land office before Voss had the access list changed. Something moved in Ethan's face. Flat, controlled anger. The kind that had been sitting cold for a long time. I'm one man, Miss Ames, and I'm not exactly the man this town trusts to tell them what's true. Why not? He looked at her steadily. That's a longer conversation. Then we'll have it when we have time. Clara pushed back her chair and began clearing the plates. What I want to know right now is this. The registry. The original land office registry you mentioned. Where is it? Locked in the county records room, 3rd floor of the courthouse. Keys held by the registrar and the county judge. Both of whom are connected to Voss in ways I can document and ways I can't. Clara stood at the basin with a plate in her hands and thought. She thought the way she thought through account discrepancies, not from the obvious entry, but from the edge, from the small anomalies that didn't announce themselves. The registrar signs the transfer documents, she said. Does he also maintain the registry log? The handwritten record of all transactions? Different clerk handles the log. Who? Ethan was quiet for just a beat too long. You know who, Clara said. Young man named Price, Robert Price. He's been with the land office 3 years. He does what he's told, and he keeps his head down, and he has a mother in town and a younger sister he's trying to get through school. Another pause. He brought me 2 of those documents, the ones in the 4th stack. Clara turned around. He knows. He suspects. He doesn't want to know more than he suspects. Ethan stood, carried his cup to the basin beside her. He's 23 years old, and he knows what happens to people in this county who ask the wrong questions. What does happen? Ethan held her gaze for a moment. Gerald Poe, he said, was not just running a mail fraud scheme for his own benefit. He was specifically recruiting women with financial and clerical experience from back east. Every woman he brought to redemption had some skill that would have been useful in a land office. Accounting, record-keeping, document drafting. He paused. Every one of them arrived broke and desperate and in need of protection. And the person positioned to offer them that protection was Harlan Voss. Clara set down the plate very carefully. He was recruiting clerks, she said. Poe was recruiting clerks for Voss, women who'd be grateful enough and isolated enough to do what they were told and not ask questions about what they were doing. Ethan's voice was flat. Yes. The kitchen was very quiet. The wind had died down outside, and the creek filled the silence, steady and indifferent. "And the woman who died in January," Clara said. "The one Mrs. Gill mentioned." Her name was Margaret Frayne. She was 31 years old, came from Cincinnati, had 6 years keeping books for a textile exporter. Ethan looked at the window. She took the position Voss offered. When she realized what the records she was handling were, she went to Sheriff Pickett. His jaw tightened. She was found in the creek 3 days later. Ruled accidental. Clara stood very still. "I want you to understand something," Ethan said. He turned from the window and looked at her directly, and the steadiness in his eyes had something underneath it now, something that cost him something to let her see. "I did not bring you out here to put you in that position. I offered you a room because you needed one, and because Gerald Poe's operation is my fault. Not directly, but close enough. I've known about Poe for 8 months, and I couldn't move on him without moving on Voss, and I wasn't ready." He paused. "What's on that desk is my problem, not yours. You are here for the roof and the $10. That's all." Clara looked at him for a long moment. "Margaret Frayne came from Cincinnati," she said. "I came from Lowell. My husband died in a fire that should never have happened, in a mill that had been cutting back on safety expenditure for 2 years. And I know that because I read the accounts, and I found the fraud, and I brought it to the foreman, and nothing happened." She picked up the plate again and finished washing it. "I have been carrying evidence of a crime that killed my husband for 2 years, with absolutely nothing I could do with it." She set the plate on the counter and turned around. "So when you tell me what's on that desk is your problem and not mine, Mr. Greer, I want you to understand that I have been waiting 2 years for a problem exactly like this one." Ethan looked at her. The look went on long enough that it became something different from looking. "You have no idea what Voss is capable of," he said. "I have some idea," Clara said. "You just told me." "That doesn't frighten you." "It frightens me considerably." She picked up the dishcloth. "But I have lived frightened before. It doesn't stop me from working." He was quiet for another moment. Then he said, "After I get back this evening, I want you to sit down with a full set of documents, all 4 stacks. I want you to tell me what you see." "I'll start now," Clara said. "You'll have a written summary by the time you get back." Something in his expression shifted. Small, quick, the way things shifted in his face when he was adjusting a calculation. "I don't have a second pen," he said. "I brought my own." He almost said something to that. She could see it arrive and get reconsidered. He picked up his hat from the table and walked out. She was halfway through the second stack when she heard the horse on the road, moving away toward town. She turned up the lamp and kept reading. She had filled 4 pages of her ledger by the time the knock came at the door. Clara set down her pen. She went to the door and opened it without thinking, which she realized, as soon as she saw who was standing on the porch, had been careless. The man was perhaps 50, heavy in the shoulders, with the kind of face that had been handsome once, and now carried the settled authority of money and the practice of not being questioned. His coat was good wool, town coat, not a working coat. His boots were clean. He had a hat in his hands, and he was turning it by the brim in a slow, careful circle. "Miss Ames," he said. He had a warm voice, the kind trained to seem warmer than it was. "I heard Ethan had a guest. I thought it was only neighborly to come introduce myself." "How do you know my name?" Clara said. "Small town," he smiled. "Word travels." He extended a hand. "Harlan Voss. I'm a lawyer here in Redemption, and a county land commissioner." Clara looked at his hand. She did not take it. "Mr. Greer isn't here," she said. "I know." The hat kept turning in his hands. "I actually came to speak with you, if you've got a few minutes." About what? About your situation. His voice was very kind, and Clara understood immediately why Margaret Frayne had gone to Sheriff Pickett instead of to this man. You could not go to this man, because this man's kindness was itself the danger. I heard about what happened with the land office position. Terrible business. Gerald Poe did real harm to some real people, and I want you to know the county takes that seriously. He paused. I may have something that could help you. A clerical position, actual this time, with wages and proper boarding in town. Nothing like what that fraud promised, but honest work. Clara kept her hand on the door. She kept her face exactly where it was, attentive, neither warm nor cold, the face she had learned to wear when a mill supervisor explained to her why the accounts she'd found were not what she thought they were. That's very generous, she said. What kind of clerical work? Land office records mostly. Filing, copying, the occasional correspondence. Simple enough. He smiled again. A woman with your background would find it straightforward. He knew her background. He knew her name. He knew about her background, and he knew Ethan was not home. He had known all of it before he rode out here. I'd have to think about it, Clara said. Of course. He put his hat back on his head. No rush, but I'd encourage you not to wait too long. Ethan Greer is... He paused, choosing the word the way a careful man chose a tool. A complicated situation for a woman alone. There are things about him in this county that you haven't had time to learn yet. Things that might affect your thinking. What kind of things? Boss looked at her for a moment, and behind the warm lawyer's face, something else looked at her too. Something that was making its own calculations. Come see me at my office, he said. We'll talk. 3rd Street, next to the courthouse. He touched his hat brim. Good day, Miss Ames. She watched him ride away down the north road until he was over the ridge. Then she went back inside and sat down at the desk and looked at her 4 pages of notes. He had come on the first morning, before she had been here a full day. He had come when Ethan was gone and offered her a job doing exactly the work that would put her hands on the records she was currently reading. Clara picked up her pen. She wrote at the top of the 5th page, He already knows I'm here. He doesn't know yet what I've read. She underlined it twice, then turned back to the 3rd stack and kept working. By the time she heard Ethan's horse on the road that evening, she had read every document in all 4 stacks, cross-referenced every parcel number, mapped every transfer date, and identified 9 specific alterations that could be proven false against the original entries, if they could access the original registry. She had also written down everything Harlan Voss had said, word for word, and the order he had said it in. Ethan came in from the barn to find her at the kitchen table with 6 pages of notes laid out in front of her, and his plate warming on the back of the stove. He looked at the notes. He looked at her. You had a visitor, he said. It wasn't a question. How did you know? Because you look like someone who just had a visitor. He sat down across from her. Who? Clara folded her hands on top of the 6 pages. Harlan Voss, she said. He offered me a job. Ethan's face went very still. He knew my name, Clara continued. He knew my professional background. He knew you were gone. She looked at him steadily. He's watching this house, or he has someone who is. And he came out here in person, which tells me he's not as comfortable as he wants to look. She slid the 6 pages across the table toward him. I wrote it all down. Ethan did not pick up the pages. He looked at them, then at her. I told you, he said quietly. This isn't your problem. And I told you, Clara said, that I've been waiting 2 years for exactly this problem. She pushed the pages a little closer. He made a mistake coming out here. He showed me what he's afraid of. And what he's afraid of, Mr. Greer, is me sitting at this desk, which means I'm already closer to useful than he wants me to be. Ethan looked at her for a long time. Outside, the creek ran over its stones in the dark, and the wind moved through the ridge pines with a low and steady sound, and somewhere far out across the grass, something called once, and went quiet. He picked up the 6 pages and started reading. Clara got up and brought his plate from the stove and sat back down across from him and waited, and the lamplight held them both in its small, warm circle, while the dark pressed in from every side, and neither one of them said anything else for a long time, because there was nothing left to say that the pages hadn't already said for them. Ethan read all 6 pages without stopping. He read them the way Clara had watched him do everything, completely still, no expression she could name, giving nothing back. When he finished the last page, he set them down in a neat stack and picked up his fork and ate 3 bites before he spoke. "You wrote down the exact words he used," he said. "In order. I wrote them down as soon as he left. This part here," Ethan tapped the 3rd page without looking up, "where he says there are things about me in this county you haven't had time to learn yet. He say anything else about that?" "No. He stopped there and waited to see what I'd do with it." "What did you do?" "I asked him what kind of things." Ethan looked up. "He told me to come to his office," Clara said. 3rd Street, next to the courthouse." Ethan set down his fork. He picked up the 3rd page and read that section again, slowly. Then he put it back in the stack and aligned all 6 pages with the edge of the table and sat back. "He's done this before," he said. "The offer first, then the warning about whoever the woman is staying with, then the meeting in the office where he explains that the safest thing for everyone is for her to take the position, keep her head down, and not ask questions about what she's filing." He paused. "Margaret Frayne turned him down 3 times before she went to picket. Did she have anyone helping her? Anyone who knew what she'd found?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "No." Clara looked at him. "You knew her?" It was not a question, and he did not treat it like one. "I knew of her," he said. "By the time I knew what was happening, she was already in the creek." He said it flat, the way he said everything. But something underneath the flatness had weight. "I'd been working the documents for 3 months when Poe brought her in. I wasn't watching close enough. I should have been." The kitchen was quiet. Clara did not offer him absolution because she didn't think he wanted it, and she didn't think he'd earned it yet either. What she said instead was, "Then let's not make the same mistake twice." He looked at her for a moment. Something moved in his face that she was beginning to recognize. The slight adjustment of a man recalibrating what he thought he knew. "The registry," Clara said. "The original handwritten log. If I can see the original entries, I can build a complete map of every alteration in your document set. Every fraudulent transfer, every acre skimmed, every forged signature. A case that no lawyer in Cheyenne can argue around." She folded her hands on the table. "You said Robert Price brought you 2 of the documents. He has access to the records room." "He has access to the records room and a mother in town and a sister he's putting through school," Ethan said. "I'm not going to be the reason something happens to a 23-year-old kid." "I'm not suggesting you be." Clara picked up her pen and pulled a fresh page toward her. "I'm suggesting I go talk to him." "No." "He won't talk to you. You said yourself." "I said no." Ethan's voice didn't rise, but it sharpened in a way she hadn't heard from him before. "Voss came out here this morning. He knows you're here. He knows what you can do, and he's already deciding what to do about you. You walking into the land office and talking to his clerk the day after he rides out here is not subtle. And subtle is the only thing keeping this alive right now." Clara looked at him. "So what do we do?" "We think before we move." He stood, carried his plate to the basin. "Voss made his offer today. You didn't take it and you didn't refuse it. That buys us a few days before he comes back with something less friendly." He turned around. In the meantime, I need you to finish mapping the document set. Everything in all 4 stacks, cross-referenced. Can you do that from what you have?
Partially. I can identify the pattern of alteration. I can show where acreage was skimmed and approximately where it went.
What I can't do without the registry is tie specific entries to specific dates in a way that proves the originals were altered after the fact, rather than recorded incorrectly to begin with.
That distinction matters legally.
It's the only distinction that matters legally, Clara said. Without it, Voss's lawyer stands up in Cheyenne and says, "These are recording errors, clerical mistakes. Unfortunate, but not criminal." Ethan leaned against the counter with his arms crossed and looked at the floor and thought. Clara waited. She had noticed by now that his silences were not empty. There was machinery running behind them. "There's a woman in town," he said finally. "Sarah Pruitt. She does laundry on First Street. I knocked on her door. She didn't let you in. She said she wasn't hiring. She wasn't." He looked up. "But she's got the original deed to her property. The one her husband filed when they claimed the land in 1874. It predates Voss's operation by 4 years, which means it predates any alteration, which means if her deed says 360 acres and the current registry says 310, the difference between those 2 numbers is proof." Clara went very still. "One original deed," she said, "cross-referenced against the altered record. That's the same as having the registry. For that parcel at least. And if we can get 2 or 3, it's a pattern, a provable pattern." Clara pulled the fresh page back toward her and started writing. "She won't talk to you. She won't talk to me. She might talk to me." Ethan said nothing, which Clara had learned to read as the closest he came to saying yes when he didn't like the answer. "I'll go in the morning," Clara said, "to do laundry." "You're going to do laundry?" "I have laundry," she said, "and so do you, unless you've been washing your own shirts out here alone, which, based on the state of that shirt, I doubt." He looked down at his shirt briefly, and then back at her with an expression that was not quite offended and not quite amused, and was the most human thing she had seen on his face yet. "Take Molly," he said. "She's slower than the chestnut, but she won't give you trouble on the road." "Which one is Molly?" "The gray one. She'll try to stop at the creek crossing. Don't let her." Clara wrote that down too, at the bottom of the fresh page, and he saw her do it, and this time the expression was definitely almost amused. She took Molly into town the next morning with a canvas bag of laundry tied to the saddle and Ethan's 2 shirts added to her own without asking him. Molly did indeed try to stop at the creek crossing. Clara clicked her tongue, pressed her heels in gently, and kept them moving. Main Street was busier than it had been on her first day. A wagon unloading at the general store, 2 men talking outside the assay office, a boy sweeping the boardwalk in front of the hotel. Heads turned when she rode past. She looked straight ahead and kept her pace even. She tied Molly at the post on First Street and went into the laundry. It was hot inside, heavy with steam and the smell of lye soap, and the woman behind the washboard did not look up when the bell jangled. Sarah Pruitt was perhaps 40, with the kind of tiredness in her face that had been there long enough to set in permanently, and hands that were red to the wrists from the water. She was younger than she looked, and older than she should have been, and something about that, the specific mathematics of it, made Clara's chest ache in a way she didn't try to stop. "I was in yesterday," Clara said. "You said you weren't hiring." "I'm not." Sarah wrung out a shirt with both hands, efficient and hard. "You need wash done?" "I do." Clara set the bag on the counter. "And I need a few minutes of your time, if you're willing." "My name is Clara Ames. I'm staying out at the Greer place." Sarah's hand stopped. "Mrs. Pruitt," Clara kept her voice even and low, "I know Ethan Greer has a certain reputation in this town. I also know that reputation was built by people who benefit from him being the man nobody listens to. And I know that you lost 50 acres of land that were yours and your husband's, and that the document that took it says one thing, and your original deed says another. She paused. I'm an accountant. I've been reading financial records for 8 years. I know what fraud looks like in a column of numbers, and I know how to prove it in a way that stands up. Another pause. I'm asking you to show me your deed. Sarah Pruitt stood with a wrung-out shirt in her hands and looked at Clara for a long time. The steam moved between them. The last woman who tried to fight this, Sarah said, ended up in the creek. I know her name, Clara said. It was Margaret Frayne, and she was 31 years old, and she went to the wrong man.
I'm not going to the wrong man. Voss owns the sheriff and the registrar and the county judge. He doesn't own a federal circuit court in Cheyenne. And that's where this is going, if I can build a case that can't be argued away. Clara held the woman's gaze. I'm not asking you to do anything that puts you at risk. I'm asking to see a piece of paper that already has your name on it, and your husband's name on it, and the date you claimed land that was yours. Sarah's jaw worked. She set the shirt down on the washboard. Wait here, she said. She came back from the back room with a tin box, the kind people kept documents in, dented and smoke-stained and clearly very old. She set it on the counter and lifted the lid and took out a folded paper and held it for a moment without giving it to Clara. My Caleb filed this in 1874, she said. Took us 3 years to prove up on it. 3 years of sod house and bad winters, and 1 year the creek flooded and we lost everything we'd planted.
She looked at the paper in her hands. He died of fever in 1880. He never knew what they did to it. I know, Clara said quietly. I'm sorry. Sarah handed her the deed. Clara unfolded it on the counter and read it carefully, twice. Then she took her pen from her coat pocket and her small notebook and wrote down 4 numbers: the parcel designation, the section, the total acreage, and the filing date. She folded the deed back exactly as it had been and put it back in Sarah's hands. 360 acres, Clara said. Filed September 14th, 1874. Sarah's eyes were very bright. That's right. The current county record shows 310. I know. Sarah's voice was steady and very tired. I went to the land office 2 years ago when I found out. The registrar showed me the file. He said the record was clear. He said I must be mistaken about the original acreage. She put the deed back in the tin and closed the lid. He was very polite about it. He would be, Clara said.
That's how it works. She put her notebook back in her pocket. Mrs. Pruitt, do you know any of the other families? The ones who lost land in the same period? Sarah looked at her. Ed Carpenter's in Nebraska. The Hollis boy is still in the county, out east near Kerrville. Jim Pruitt, no relation to me. He's got a place on the South Road. She paused. There are others. People don't talk about it because talking about it in this town gets you a visit from a very polite man who explains why you're mistaken. Would you talk to them? Would they talk to me? Why would they trust you? Sarah said it without cruelty, just a straight question from a woman who had learned to ask straight questions. They wouldn't yet, Clara said, but they'd trust you. And I'm asking you to trust me, which I know I have not yet earned. She picked up the canvas bag. I'll come back Thursday for the laundry. Between now and then, I'm going to put together something worth trusting.
She paused at the door. Whatever happens, Mrs. Pruitt, your deed is your deed. It says what it says, and it's been in that tin box since 1874, and Harlan Voss can't change that. Sarah picked up the wrung shirt and went back to the washboard. Thursday, she said. Clara untied Molly from the post and was about to mount when she heard her name.
She turned. Robert Price was standing 20 feet away on the boardwalk. He was young, as Ethan had said. Younger than she expected. Slight, with an anxious quality to his stillness that told her he had been standing there trying to decide whether to speak for some time before he did. "Miss Ames." He came down off the boardwalk and stopped in the street. He kept his voice very low. "You're staying at the Greer place?" "I am." "He's been building a case." Robert Price looked at his own hands briefly. "Against Voss." "I know," Clara said. "They know he's building it. Voss and the registrar.
They changed the access to the records room last month. Changed who has keys. They know Greer has copies of some of the documents, but they don't know how complete the set is." He looked at her. 3 days ago, Voss told the registrar to pull the original transfer files and rebox them. New location. I don't know where. Clara felt that the way you felt a floor shift under you. Not falling, just the sudden awareness that the ground had moved. "They're moving the originals," she said. "Or destroying them." Robert Price's voice cracked slightly on the last word. He was 23 years old, and he had brought 2 documents to Ethan Greer at considerable risk to himself, and he was standing in the middle of First Street, in plain view of anyone who cared to look, talking to a woman who had arrived 3 days ago. She understood what it cost him to do that. "Mr. Price," she said carefully, "the original registry log, the handwritten transaction record."
Is that included in what they're moving? He shook his head. That's kept separate. In the reading room on the 2nd floor, not the records room. It's a public document. Anyone can request to view it. He paused. But you'd have to request it through the registrar's office, and the registrar would know you'd looked. Is there another way to access it? He was quiet for a moment. Public viewing hours are 8 to noon Monday through Saturday. You sign the request log, they bring you the volume, you sit at the reading table. He looked at her steadily. If you sit at the east end of the reading table, and you bring your own paper for notes, and if the clerk on duty is the one who works Tuesday mornings, he takes his break at 9:30, and he's gone 20 minutes, and he doesn't lock the cabinet when he leaves, because he's done it 1,000 times and nothing's ever happened. Clara looked at him. She did not say anything for a moment. "What's your sister's name?" she said. He blinked. "Martha. She's 17. What does she want to study?" "Medicine," he said, and then looked slightly surprised that the word had come out. "Good," Clara said. "That's a fine thing to want." She took Molly's reins and mounted. "Mr. Price, whatever you've done and whatever you do from here, you should know that Margaret Frayne deserved better, and so did every family on those parcels." She gathered the reins. "Tuesday morning," she said, 8 o'clock. She did not look back. She kept Molly at an even pace down First Street and onto the North Road, and didn't push her until the town was out of sight behind the ridge. Then she let the mare move, and the cold air hit her face, and she thought about moving originals and 20-minute breaks, and a girl in Nebraska named Martha Price who wanted to study medicine and would need the world to make a little more room for her than it currently intended to. She thought about Daniel. She thought about the compensation column, and the fire, and the foreman who smiled. She thought about how she had found the fraud and had nowhere to take it. She was not going to let that happen again. Ethan was mending the corral fence when she rode in. He straightened when he saw her face. "What happened?" he said. "Sarah Pruitt has her original deed. 360 acres, filed 1874. The current county record shows 310. Clara dismounted and handed him Molly's reins. "And Robert Price found me on First Street. They're moving the original transfer files, possibly destroying them."
She looked at him. "But the registry log is in the public reading room. Available for viewing Tuesday mornings, 9:30, locked cabinet."
Ethan held Molly's reins and looked at her. The afternoon light was behind him, and she couldn't read his expression fully, but she could read the quality of the stillness that came over him. It was different from his usual stillness. It was the stillness of a man who had been fighting uphill for a very long time and had just seen, for the first time, a level stretch of ground. "You got all that in one morning?" he said. "I went to do laundry," Clara said. He stood there for another moment, with the reins in his hand, and something working behind his eyes that he wasn't putting into words. Then he said, "Come inside. Tell me everything, in order." She followed him in, and she told him, in order, and he listened. And when she was done, he sat across from her at the table, and looked at his hands, and was quiet for a long time. "Price took a real risk talking to you in the street," he said. "I know. Voss may already know." "I know that too." Clara poured coffee into both cups. "We have until Tuesday morning. That's 4 days to prepare.
I need to know everything you know about those documents, everything you know about the pattern of alteration, and everything you know about Harlan Voss, and how he built this, and who else is in it with him." Ethan wrapped his hands around his cup. He looked at her across the table. "That's a long night," he said. "Then we'd better start," Clara said. She pulled her ledger toward her and opened it to a fresh page. And Ethan began to talk, and outside the window, the sun went down behind the ridge, and the dark came on, and the lamp burned between them, while the creek kept running in the dark with its old, indifferent song. And Clara Ames wrote down every word. They worked through most of the night. Ethan talked and Clara wrote, and by the time the lamp burned low, and the creek outside had gone from murmur to whisper in the deep quiet of 2 in the morning, she had 11 pages of notes in her ledger, and a picture in her head that was complete enough to make her hands want to shake. Harlan Voss had been county land commissioner for 6 years. Before that, he had been a territorial land agent in Colorado, where, Ethan said flatly, the same pattern had run for 4 years before he left. The fraud was not complicated. It was not supposed to be complicated. It worked precisely because it was simple. Shave acreage from the transfer records in small amounts. 10 acres here, 50 acres there. Amounts small enough that a family checking their original deed against the county record might assume a recording error rather than theft. Accumulate the shaved acreage on paper. Quietly consolidate it under the Redemption Land Development Company. Then sell it at market rate to buyers who never knew where the land came from. The buyers were real. The sales were legal. By the time any of it could be questioned, the money had moved twice, and the paper trail had 3 legal transactions between the fraud and the cash. "The Land Development Company," Clara said. Who owns it? On paper, 2 men, a businessman in Denver named Alcott, and a silent partner listed in the territorial filings as J. Rourke. Ethan turned his coffee cup in his hands. J. Rourke does not exist. I spent 2 months trying to find him. Voss. Almost certainly, but without piercing the corporate filing, I can't prove it. And the territorial filing office is in Cheyenne, which means Voss has to know someone there too, Clara said. Or he doesn't, and that's the gap. Ethan looked at her across the table. If the Cheyenne filing was done without cover, if he felt safe enough there to not need cover, then J. Rourke's registration documents might have a real address, a real signature, something that can be traced. Clara wrote it down. She underlined it. Tuesday morning, she said. I get the registry log. I map every altered entry against the parcels in your document set. I build the complete transfer record from original to current. That, plus Sarah Pruitt's deed, and any other originals we can collect from the other families." She looked at her notes. "How many of the 14 families are still in the county?" 6, maybe 7. I need to talk to them. "After Tuesday," Ethan said. "Not before. Not until we know what the registry shows." Clara nodded. She looked at the 11 pages laid out across the table between them, the neat columns of dates and parcel numbers and dollar amounts. And she thought about 6 years of this running in Redemption, and 4 years before that in Colorado, and however many families in Colorado she would never know the names of. And she let herself feel the full weight of it for exactly 10 seconds, before she folded it back down and picked up her pen. "Tell me about the registrar," she said. "His name and how long he's been with Voss." Ethan told her. She wrote it down. They kept going. She slept 4 hours and was up before him, which she was learning was not easy to do. When she came out of her room with her ledger and her pen case, he was already at the stove, and there was coffee made, and he looked at her with a particular expression she had come to recognize as his version of asking if she was all right. Not in words, just a quick assessment, a waiting. "I'm fine," she said, which was true enough. "You should eat before we talk through Tuesday." "I'll eat while we talk through Tuesday." He made eggs. She made a plan. They sat across from each other in the early morning light, and she walked him through it step by step, and he listened and asked questions in the flat, precise way he asked everything. And twice he caught something she'd missed, and she corrected it and wrote the correction in the margin, and did not waste time being annoyed that she'd missed it. "The clerk on Tuesday morning," Ethan said. "Price said he takes his break at 9:30. 20 minutes. 20 minutes is enough to read the relevant entries, but not enough to copy them fully." "I'm not going to copy them fully," Clara said. "I'm going to copy the entry dates, the parcel designations, and the recorded acreage for every transaction in the relevant period. That's 3 numbers per entry. I can do 40 entries in 20 minutes if I don't slow down." Ethan looked at her. "You've timed it." "I timed it last night while you were talking." She picked up her fork. "I practiced on the document set. 38 entries in 18 minutes, working from a list I already know." He was quiet for a moment. "The registrar will know you accessed the log," he said. "Price was clear about that. You signed the request form." "I know." "Which means Voss will know by noon Tuesday." "I know that too." Clara set down her fork. "Which means whatever I get from the log Tuesday morning, we have to be ready to move on by Tuesday afternoon. Not in a week. Not when it's convenient. That day." Ethan looked at the table. She watched the calculation run behind his eyes. She could almost see it now, the way he weighed and ordered and assessed. And she thought that under different circumstances, he would have made an exceptional accountant. "I can have a rider to Cheyenne by Tuesday midday," he said, "if the package is ready." "What kind of package?" "The document set. All 32 pages of copies, plus your mapping analysis, plus whatever you pull from the log Tuesday morning. Addressed to a federal land commissioner named Hargrove. He's honest." A pause. "He owes me a debt from 3 years back. He'll open the package." "Will he act on it?" "If the case is solid enough, he won't have a choice." Ethan looked at her. "Is it going to be solid enough?" Clara thought about 11 pages of notes and a 60-year-old woman's original deed in a smoke-stained tin box, and a 23-year-old clerk standing in the street talking to her at considerable risk to himself and everything he loved. "Yes," she said, "it will be." Sunday passed in work. Monday passed in more work. Clara mapped and cross-referenced and wrote and rewrote until her hand ached, and the analysis was as tight and clean as she knew how to make it. And Ethan rode out Monday afternoon and came back at dusk and said he had a rider confirmed for Tuesday noon, a man he trusted, which Clara understood meant a man who was not connected to anyone in Redemption who mattered to Voss.
Monday night, she could not sleep.
She lay in the dark and listened to the wind and the creek and went through the plan one more time in her head, the way she had gone through mill accounts on the nights before an audit, checking every column, every entry, every place where something could go wrong. She thought about Margaret Frayne. She thought about that a lot. She got up at 5 and made coffee and sat at the desk with the lamp turned low and read through her analysis one more time. And when she found 2 places where the language was imprecise, she rewrote them. Ethan came out at 6 and did not say anything about the fact that she was already at the desk. And she did not say anything about the fact that he had clearly not slept much either. He drove her into town in the wagon. The ride was 2 miles, and they did not talk for most of it. When the first buildings of redemption came into view, he said, "You don't have to sign your real name on the request form." Clara looked at him. "If I sign a false name, the document is inadmissible." "If you sign your real name, Voss knows who pulled the log before you're out the door." "He's going to know anyway. Price told me that." She looked back at the road ahead. "Signing a false name only helps if I'm planning to hide afterward. I'm not planning to hide afterward." Ethan said nothing. She felt him look at her sideways and then look back at the road. "Whatever happens after Tuesday," Clara said, "I need everything I pulled from that log to be clean and legal and documented. That means my real name on the form, my real signature." She paused. Daniel's name was on every document he ever signed for that mill. It didn't protect him, but it was still his name, and it was still the right thing. Ethan pulled the wagon up on 2nd Street. He set the brake. He did not immediately get down. "You'll have 40 minutes at most before word gets back to Voss," he said. "Probably less. When you're done in that reading room, you come straight to the wagon. Don't stop. Don't talk to anyone." "And if Voss is already there when I come out?" "Then you keep walking and you get in the wagon and we go." He looked at her. "I'll be right here." Clara climbed down from the wagon with her ledger and her pen case. She straightened her cuffs. She did not look back at him, because if she looked back at him, she thought she might find something in his face that would make it harder to walk toward that building alone. And she could not afford harder right now. The courthouse was 4 blocks east on 2nd Street. She walked it in the morning cold, with her breath clouding in front of her, and her heart doing something loud and unhelpful behind her ribs. And she kept her pace even and her eyes forward. The reading room on the 2nd floor was small. 3 tables, bookshelves on 2 walls, a cabinet against the 3rd. The clerk was young, younger than Price, with the look of someone who had been told to look official and wasn't entirely sure how. He took her request form without making eye contact, went to the cabinet, and came back with a heavy bound volume that he set on the reading table with a thud. "You need to stay at this table," he said. "No removing pages, no ink on the volume itself." "Of course," Clara said. She sat at the east end of the table, the way Price had told her. She opened her ledger to a fresh section and uncapped her pen and opened the registry volume to the index. She found the relevant period in 4 minutes. January 1882 through August 1884. She began reading entry by entry, her pen moving fast and small, 3 numbers per entry, date, parcel, acreage. The numbers were there. Every transaction Ethan had copies of was in the original log, and the acreage in the original log was different from the acreage in the altered copies. Every single time, without exception. She kept writing. The clerk sat at his desk near the door and turned the pages of something and did not watch her. The clock on the wall moved. 8:45. She was on her 22nd entry. 9 o'clock. 31st entry. 9:15. 43rd entry. She turned a page in the log. 44th. At 9:28, the clerk stood up, said,
Back in a few minutes, to no one in particular, and went out the door. Clara did not change her pace. She kept writing. 48th entry. 49th. There were two more she needed, the two largest transactions, the ones Ethan had flagged as the clearest examples because the acreage difference was too large to attribute to clerical error. She found the first one, wrote it, found the second. She was 2 numbers into the second entry when the door opened. It was not the clerk. Harlan Voss came in unhurried, hat in hand, turning it by the brim in that slow, careful circle she remembered from the porch. He was alone.
He looked at her at the reading table with her pen in her hand and the open registry volume in front of her, and he smiled the warm lawyer's smile. "Miss Ames," he said, "what a coincidence." Clara finished writing the number. She capped her pen. She closed her ledger with her notes inside it, and set her pen case on top of it, and put her hands flat on the table in front of her, and looked at him. "Mr. Voss," she said. He sat down across the table from her without being invited. He set his hat down and folded his hands, and looked at her with an expression of patient, pleasant concern, and she thought about Margaret Frayne, sitting across from this man with this expression, and no one waiting in a wagon 4 blocks away. "I wanted to follow up on our conversation," he said, "about the position. You hadn't come to my office, and I was concerned perhaps I hadn't explained the offer clearly." "You explained it clearly," Clara said. "Good." He looked at the closed registry volume, and then back at her. His expression did not change. "Researching something?" "Viewing the public record," Clara said, "as is my right." "Of course." A small pause. "Find what you were looking for?" Clara looked at him steadily. She thought about what Ethan had said. Whatever happens, you walk to the wagon. She thought about Daniel. She thought about 11 pages of notes waiting in that ledger under her hands. "Yes," she said. "I did." Something shifted in Voss's face. Still the smile, still the warmth, but something behind it had recalculated. "Miss Ames, I want to say something plainly, because I think you're a plain-spoken woman, and I respect that." He leaned forward slightly. "You've been in redemption 1 week. You've been staying with a man who has a history in this county that you do not fully understand. And you've been looking at documents that are part of an official county record that, I can assure you, has been reviewed and verified at the territorial level." He paused. "Whatever Ethan Greer has told you about those records, I would encourage you to consider the source carefully." "I always consider the source," Clara said. "It's the first thing I do." "Then consider his." Voss's voice was still warm, still even. 3 years ago, Ethan Greer was a territorial investigator assigned to this county. He was relieved of that position for conduct unbecoming. The investigation into that conduct is sealed, but I can tell you that the people who made the decision to relieve him were not men who did such things lightly. He let that sit for a moment. He's been running a private campaign against the county records office since then, against me personally. And now he has brought a woman into his home who has skills that are useful to that campaign. Another pause. "I would simply ask you to think carefully about whether you are being helped or being used." The room was very quiet. Clara thought about Ethan at the desk, reading her 6 pages of notes. She thought about the bolt on the bedroom door, installed before she arrived. She thought about the way he had said, "I wasn't watching close enough," when he talked about Margaret Frayne. Not, "I couldn't have known," not, "It wasn't my fault," but, "I wasn't watching close enough," which was the thing an honest man said. "Mr. Voss," she said. She picked up her ledger and her pen case and stood.
I spent 8 years reading accounts for men who were very good at explaining why the numbers I found were not what I thought they were. She looked at him across the table. I have heard every version of that explanation that exists, and I have never once, in 8 years, been wrong about the numbers. She walked to the door.
Miss Ames, his voice came from behind her, still even, but something underneath it now that had not been there before. Not warm. Gerald Poe worked for me for 8 months before I had him removed for conduct. I want you to know that. I want you to know that because whatever he told women like you about the opportunities available in redemption, he was operating outside of my authority and contrary to my explicit instructions. And whatever happened to those women was his doing, not mine. Clara stopped. She did not turn around. She stood in the doorway for one moment. Gerald Poe is gone, she said. Margaret Frayne is in the ground, and the rest of us are still here. She walked out. The stairs were 12 steps down to the ground floor. She counted them. The street outside was bright and cold, and she turned west toward 2nd Street and walked without hurrying, without looking back, without changing her pace even when she heard the courthouse door open behind her. She did not know if it was Voss or the returning clerk or someone else. She did not look. Ethan was in the wagon where he had said he would be. He saw her face when she turned the corner, and he had the brake off and his hand out before she reached him. She took it and climbed up and sat, and he put the horse in motion immediately, smooth and fast, without appearing rushed. He was there, Ethan said. He was there. Clara pressed the ledger against her chest with both arms. I got everything, all 51 entries. He didn't say anything for half a block. Then he said, Are you all right? Yes, she meant it. He tried to tell me you used me, that you brought me out here because you needed someone with my skills. A pause. Did you believe him? No. She looked ahead at the road, the buildings thinning as they reached the edge of town. But I want you to tell me about being relieved as a territorial investigator. Whatever it is, I want to hear it from you. A long silence. The wagon moved. The last building of Redemption passed on her left, and then there was open road, grass, the ridge in the distance. 3 years ago, Ethan said, I was investigating a land dispute in this county. I found evidence of fraud in the county records. I filed a report with the territorial office in Cheyenne, recommending a full audit of the land registry. He paused. 2 weeks later, I was called to Cheyenne and told the report had been reviewed and found to contain unsubstantiated allegations against a prominent county official, and that my conduct in filing it without sufficient evidence constituted a breach of investigative protocol. Voss had someone in the Cheyenne office, Clara said. Voss had someone in the Cheyenne office, Ethan confirmed. I was given the choice to retract the report or be formally investigated for misconduct. I refused to retract it. Another pause. So they investigated me for misconduct, found enough small procedural violations to justify relieving me, and sealed the record. And you came back here. I came back here, with copies of everything I'd found, and I've been building it since then. He looked at her sideways. I did bring you out here because you have skills I needed. I want that said plainly. I offered you the room because you needed it, and because Poe's scheme was connected to what I was building. But I also knew what you were the minute you told me you kept accounts. He looked back at the road. That is the truth of it. All of it. Clara sat with that for a moment. The wagon moved. The ridge got closer. All right, she said. All right. You told me plainly. That's what I asked for. She looked at the road ahead. Now let's talk about getting this to Cheyenne. Because Voss is going to move today. Whatever he was waiting for before, he's done waiting. Ethan's jaw set. The rider leaves at noon. Then we have 3 hours.
Clara opened her ledger on her lap and uncapped her pen. "Drive faster," she said. He drove faster. She wrote. The ridge came up and fell behind them, and the cabin appeared in the valley below, and the creek caught the morning light where it ran between the willow banks, bright and cold and fast and absolutely indifferent to the weight of what was riding in that wagon toward it. 2 people and 51 numbers, and the long overdue accounting of what this county owed to the families whose names Clara now knew by heart. The names she had written down and would not forget. Not ever. Not for the rest of her life. They had 3 hours. She was going to use every minute. The writer's name was Cole Duggan, and he was gone before noon with the package wrapped in oilcloth and tied twice. Addressed to Federal Land Commissioner Hargrove in Cheyenne, in Clara's precise handwriting. She stood on the porch and watched him go over the ridge, and then she went back inside and sat down at the desk and waited for what she knew was coming. It came at 3 in the afternoon. Not Voss himself. 2 men she didn't recognize, driving hard down the north road, stopping at the corral fence. Ethan was already on the porch when they pulled up, and Clara stood in the doorway behind him and watched. Greer. The taller one had a deputy's badge, recently polished. Sheriff Pickett wants a word. Sheriff Pickett knows where I live, Ethan said. He can come have a word himself. He's asking you to come to town. I reckon he can keep asking. Ethan's voice was the same flat, unhurried thing it always was. Tell him when he's got a legal reason to require my presence, I'll be there. Until then, I've got fence to mend. The deputy looked past Ethan to Clara in the doorway. His gaze stayed there a moment too long. Ma'am, he said, without warmth. Deputy, Clara said. They rode back the way they came. Ethan watched them to the ridge, then turned and came inside and closed the door. How long do we have? Clara said. Depends on what Voss tells Pickett to do. He sat down at the table. If he pushes Pickett to move on us legally, a day, maybe 2. He'd need a warrant and a judge, and the judge, even bought, takes a little time. He looked at her. If he decides to move without Pickett, tonight. Clara absorbed that. The package is already gone. The package is already gone, Ethan confirmed. Whatever happens here doesn't change what Hargrove receives. But if we're not here to answer questions, then it's one voice telling the story instead of 2. He looked at his hands on the table, the rope-burned scar on his right wrist catching the afternoon light. Hargrove is honest, but he's careful. He'll want to interview us before he acts. If Voss gets to him first with the misconduct file, and there's nobody to counter it, then we need to be in Cheyenne, Clara said. Or we need someone else in this county telling the same story we are, loudly enough that Voss can't contain it. He looked at her. Sarah Pruitt. The other families. I told her I'd have something worth trusting before I came back to her. Clara stood. I have it now. She picked up her ledger and looked at him. I need the wagon. Ethan stood. I'll drive. You'll be recognized the moment you set foot in town. Every conversation I have will be about you instead of about the documents. She held his gaze. I need to do this part without you. A long silence. She could see him working against it. Not from stubbornness, she understood now, but from the particular cost of having done things alone for 3 years and knowing what happened to people who didn't have anyone beside them. Molly's faster than she looks on the back road, he said. Takes you in on First Street, not Main. Less visible. I know the back road. You've ridden it once. I know the back road, Clara said again, quietly. He looked at her for another moment. Then he went to the shelf above the desk and took down the Colt and held it out to her. She looked at it. She looked at him. She took it. Back before dark, he said. Back before dark, she said. She rode Molly on the back road, with the Colt in her coat pocket
and her ledger in the saddlebag, and the cold coming down off the ridge with the particular sharpness of late afternoon in October. She went to Sarah Pruitt first. The laundry was closed, but Sarah answered the back door before Clara finished knocking, and Clara understood she had been expecting something. Not necessarily Clara, but something. The way people expected things when they had been living on the edge of a bad situation long enough to feel it move. "Come in," Sarah said.
Clara laid 11 pages of analysis on Sarah Pruitt's kitchen table, and she talked for 20 minutes straight. She talked about the document set, and the registry log, and the 51 entries, and what the numbers showed, entry by entry, family by family. She talked about the package that was already riding to Cheyenne. She talked about what a federal land commissioner could do with a case this complete and this documented, and what the territorial courts could do after that. Sarah sat across the table and listened without interrupting, her hands folded in front of her, her eyes on Clara's face. When Clara finished, Sarah said, "You went into that courthouse this morning knowing Voss would know." "Yes." "Why?" Clara thought about how to answer that. She thought about Daniel's name on every document he'd ever signed. "Because the truth has to be signed," she said. "If I hide, it looks like I have something to hide, and I don't." Sarah looked at the 11 pages on her table.
Jim Pruitt is on the South Road, she said. No relation. He lost 80 acres in 1883. He's been furious about it for 2 years, and he's been too frightened to move. She stood up. "The Hollis boy, Thomas, he's 31 now. He's out east near Kerrville. If I send a rider tonight, he could be in town by tomorrow morning." That would mean when Voss's people come looking for someone in this county to tell a different story, they'll find 6 of us telling the same one. Sarah picked up the 11 pages and held them carefully, the way you held something that had been a long time coming. "I'm not frightened of Harlan Voss anymore, Miss Ames. I have been frightened of him for 2 years, and I have a deed in a tin box that says he is a thief, and I am done." She looked at Clara. "Go see Jim Pruitt. I'll send for Thomas Hollis." Clara rode the South Road as the sun dropped toward the ridgeline.
Jim Pruitt came out to meet her before she reached the fence. The kind of man who watched the road because he'd been waiting for something for a long time and wasn't sure if what came down it would be good or bad. He was 52 years old, with a gray beard and a directness about him that reminded her, unexpectedly, of Ethan. She said Ethan's name, and Jim Pruitt's expression didn't close the way she expected. It steadied. "Greer's been building this," he said. It wasn't a question. 3 years, Clara said, and now it's built. Jim Pruitt had his original deed in the house, not in a box, but framed on the wall. And when Clara saw that, she understood something about what this land meant to him that no column of numbers could fully capture. He took it off the wall and held it in his hands and read the acreage out loud. 420 acres, filed 1879. And his voice only broke on the last number, the one that told the full distance between what was his and what they'd taken. "What do you need from me?" he said. "I need you in redemption tomorrow morning," Clara said, "with that deed, and I need you to be willing to sign a sworn statement." "Tell me where and when," he said. She was back on the North Road with the light failing when the other rider appeared. He came from the direction of town, moving fast, and her hand went to her coat pocket before she'd made a conscious decision. And then she saw it was Robert Price, and she let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. He pulled up beside her on the road, his horse blowing hard. His face was pale and tight. "They arrested Ethan," he said. The world went very quiet. "When?" Clara said. "An hour ago. Pickett came out with 3 men and a warrant. Breach of public records, theft of county documents, Robert Price looked at her with a desperate focus of someone delivering news they wish they didn't have. Voss got to the judge this afternoon. The warrant's signed. They've got him in the jail on 2nd Street. Clara sat on Molly in the failing light and thought. She thought the way she thought through a column that didn't balance. Not from panic, but from the outside edge, finding where the error was and what it meant and what came next. The package is already in Cheyenne, she said. Voss knows that, Price said. That's why he moved tonight instead of waiting. He wants Greer's credibility destroyed before Hargrove opens the package. A sealed misconduct file, plus a current arrest for document theft, makes everything in the package look like the work of a criminal with a vendetta, Clara said. Yes, I see it. She looked at him. Robert, does your mother own her house? He blinked at the change of direction. Yes, since 1878. Does she have her deed? Yes, of course. Get it. Tonight. And your sister Martha, is she in town? She's at home. Why? Because I am going to need witnesses tomorrow morning who are not connected to Ethan Greer, Clara said. Your mother, your sister, Sarah Pruitt, Jim Pruitt, Thomas Hollis, if Sarah's rider reaches him in time. She gathered Molly's reins. Robert, what you've done already has taken real courage. I need a little more of it. I need you tomorrow morning to walk into the land office and request the current registry for official review. Not secretly, officially, in writing, with your name on it. He stared at her. They'll fire me. They'll try, Clara said. But a county clerk submitting an official records review request is doing his job. Fire him for it, in writing, and that document becomes part of the case. She looked at him steadily. You brought Ethan 2 pages at considerable risk to yourself. This is the last step, and you won't be alone in it. Robert Price sat his horse in the gathering dark and looked at something over Clara's shoulder that she couldn't see. Something that was probably his mother's house and his sister's future, and the 2 years he'd spent knowing what he knew and keeping quiet about it. All right, he said. All right. She rode back to the cabin and went inside and stood in the empty main room for one moment, feeling the particular quality of a space from which someone has been removed who should be in it. She did not allow herself more than a moment. Then she sat down at the desk and started writing. She wrote through the night. She wrote the sworn affidavit of everything she had seen in the registry log, entry by entry, number by number, formatted the way she knew legal documents needed to be formatted, from 8 years of watching lawyers read things and decide whether to act on them. She wrote a formal accounting analysis, tying every altered record in the document set to its corresponding original entry, showing the pattern of fraud across 6 years and 14 families, with the precision she would have applied to any set of accounts that needed to be presented to men who would look for reasons to dismiss it. She wrote a letter to Commissioner Hargrove directly, separate from the analysis, in the plain and direct voice she had used her whole professional life, telling him what she had found, and how she had found it, and what she was asking him to do, and why the man currently in the Redemption Jail was not a criminal with a vendetta, but the only honest person in this county who had tried to do what Hargrove's own office should have done 3 years ago. She signed everything with her full name, Clara Ann Ames, formerly of Lowell, Massachusetts, currently of Redemption, Wyoming Territory. She sealed the letters at 3 a.m. and put them in the saddlebag for morning, and went to the bedroom and lay down on the bed without undressing, and slept for 4 hours, with the Colt on the table beside her. She was up at 7. She was in Redemption by 8:30. Sarah Pruitt was waiting on First Street with her tin box. Jim Pruitt was there, the deed from his wall in his hands, still in its frame because he hadn't wanted to take it out. Thomas Hollis had ridden through the night and arrived at 6 a.m, a young man with his father's deed and his father's eyes,
and 31 years of knowing what had been done to his family. Robert Price's mother, a small woman with silver hair and an expression of absolute composure, stood beside her son with their house deed in a cloth bag. Martha Price stood next to her mother, 17 years old and not frightened at all, which Clara thought was the most important thing she'd seen in days. She looked at all of them on First Street in the early morning light, and she said, "Thank you, every one of you. Here is what we're going to do." She walked into the sheriff's office alone. Pickett was behind his desk, and he stood when she came in, which told her something about him. That there was enough decency left in him to stand for a woman, even one he'd been told to manage. He was heavy and red-faced and uncomfortable, and she thought that was the most useful thing about him right now, that he was uncomfortable. "Miss Ames," he said. "Sheriff Pickett." Clara set her saddlebag on his desk and took out the sealed letters, the affidavit, the analysis, and a list of 6 names. "I have outside on this street 6 residents of Crockett County, each holding an original land deed that contradicts the current county registry record for their parcel. Each of them is prepared to sign a sworn statement to that effect." She set the papers in front of him. "I have here a sworn affidavit from myself, documenting what I read in the public land registry yesterday morning, supported by a cross-referenced analysis of 32 county documents currently in evidence with a federal land commissioner in Cheyenne." She set the letters on top. "And I have here correspondence addressed to Commissioner Hargrove, which I am asking you, as the law enforcement officer of this county, to transmit to the Territorial Marshal's Office for forwarding, officially, with your name on the transmittal." Pickett looked at the papers on his desk. He looked at her. "Miss Ames, what Mr. Greer has been doing with those documents constitutes—" "What Ethan Greer has been doing," Clara said, "is the job your office should have been doing for 6 years. And I think you know that." She held his gaze. "I think you have known something was wrong for a long time, Sheriff, and I think the reason you haven't acted is that you've been calculating the risk and concluding it was too high." She paused. "I am telling you the calculation has changed. There are 6 people on that street with original deeds. There is a complete case in a federal commissioner's hands in Cheyenne. There is a county clerk who filed an official records review request this morning under his own name." She paused. "The only question left is which side of this you're standing on when it resolves." Silence. The jail was through a door at the back of the office, and she could feel the weight of what was behind that door. The particular weight of knowing someone was in a cell who should not be. Pickett picked up the top letter, read the name on the front, set it down, picked up the affidavit. She watched his eyes move down the first page, slow and deliberate, and she watched the moment he reached the column of numbers, 51 entries, dates and parcels and acreage, clean and precise and completely irrefutable. He set it down. He looked at the wall for a moment. "Harlan Voss," he said, "has been in this county longer than I have." "I know," Clara said. "That's not a reason. That's an explanation. There's a difference." Another silence. Then Pickett opened his desk drawer and took out a ring of keys and stood up. "I'm going to release Greer on his own recognizance, pending investigation," he said. "The warrant was— the circumstances require review." He came around the desk. "You tell those folks outside to come in, and I'll take their statements personally." He went to the back door and unlocked it, and a moment later she heard his voice, and then she heard Ethan's, low and calm, already asking a question rather than making a demand, which was so entirely like him that she almost smiled. Ethan came through the door and stopped when he saw her. He had been in that cell since the previous afternoon, and he looked it. A night without sleep, the controlled, compressed quality of a man who had spent hours not allowing himself to react. He looked at her face, and she looked at his, and they stood there for a moment across the office, and neither one said anything. Then he said, "The package." "Already in Cheyenne," she said, "as of yesterday noon." "The families. 6 of them outside with their original deeds. Pickett is taking statements." She picked up her saddlebag. "It's done, Ethan. Or it will be." He crossed the office in 4 steps and stood in front of her, close, and she looked up at him and saw something in his face she had not seen there before, not once in the 10 days she had known him. All the control was still there, all the steadiness, but something behind it had come through, something that had apparently been waiting behind it for a long time. "You rode out last night," he said. "Alone. You told me Molly was faster than she looked." Clara. She had not heard him use her first name before. She stood very still. "I built this case for 3 years," he said. "Alone. Because I didn't trust anyone in this county and I couldn't afford to. And because the last time I trusted the wrong person, it cost Margaret Frayne her life and cost me everything else." He paused. "And you came here 10 days ago with 40 cents and a canvas bag, and in 10 days you did what 3 years alone couldn't do." His jaw worked. "I want you to know I see that.
I want you to know I am not a man who lets things go unsaid that should be said." Clara looked at him for a moment. "You installed a bolt on that bedroom door before I arrived," she said. "Before you knew I was coming. Before any of this." "I installed it after Margaret Frayne," he said. "In case—" He stopped. "In case the next woman Poe brought in had somewhere safe to go." "That is not the action of a man who uses people," Clara said. He held her gaze. Outside on First Street, she could hear voices. Sarah Pruitt's among them, clear and steady, and the sound of Pickett's office door opening as people came in from the street. And somewhere further away, the sound of the creek, indifferent and endless and bright. "I told you the first day," Ethan said. "I'm not looking for a wife." "I know what you told me. But I want to tell you something different now." He said it the way he said everything. Flat, deliberate, no wasted words, but with a quality underneath that was not flat at all. "I want to tell you that I would like you to stay. Not for the accounts, not for the documents." He paused. "For no reason that has anything to do with what's useful." Clara stood in the Redemption Sheriff's office with a saddlebag over one shoulder and Sarah Pruitt's voice coming through the wall, and the long arithmetic of the last 10 days still running in her head. And she thought about 40 cents, and a canvas bag, and a door she'd grabbed without thinking in the middle of a street. She thought about Daniel, whose name was on every document he'd ever signed, who had died in a fire that should never have happened, and who had loved her plainly and well, and whom she had mourned for 2 years with the particular faithfulness of a woman who understood what she'd had. She thought, "I have been looking at numbers long enough to know when something adds up." "The bolt on the door," she said. "I'd like to keep it." Something moved in Ethan's face. Slow, real. The kind of thing that didn't happen quickly in a man like him, because nothing did. "It's your door," he said. "Throw it whenever you want." "And I'll need my own desk," Clara said. "The one you have is not large enough for 2 people working a case." "I'll build you one," he said. "I know you will," she said. Commissioner Hargrove's investigation opened formally 5 weeks later. The warrant for Harlan Voss was signed by a federal judge in Cheyenne on a Thursday morning in November, and by Thursday afternoon, Voss was in custody, and the County Land Records Office was sealed pending audit. The registrar resigned before anyone came to ask him questions. The judge who had signed Ethan's warrant resigned the following week. Robert Price was not fired. He was, 6 months after the investigation concluded, appointed acting registrar while the county rebuilt its land office from the foundation up.
which Clara thought was exactly the right outcome for a 23-year-old who had spent 2 years knowing what he knew and had finally found the moment to do something with it. Martha Price enrolled in medical school in Philadelphia the following autumn. Clara wrote her a letter of recommendation that ran to 3 pages and said every word she meant. Sarah Pruitt got her 50 acres back. Jim Pruitt got his 80. Thomas Hollis got everything his father had filed for in 1874, the full parcel, and he stood in the land office on the day the corrected deed was issued and looked at the number on the paper for a long time without saying anything, and nobody in that room asked him to. The cabin on the North Road had 2 desks by spring.
Ethan built Clara's from pine he'd cut himself, wider than his own and with a shelf along the back for her ledgers. And she sat at it on a morning in March, with the window open and the creek running loud with snowmelt and the sun coming in at the angle it came in at in early spring. And she thought about Lowell and the mill and the compensation column and the fire. And she thought about 40 cents and a canvas bag and a man she'd stopped in the middle of a street because she had nowhere else to go. She thought about Daniel. She thought about him with love and with grief, and with the particular gratitude of a woman who had been well loved once and knew the difference between that and everything else. Then she opened her ledger to a fresh page and picked up her pen and started working. And from the other room, she heard Ethan's boots on the floor, steady and deliberate as they always were, and the sound of the stove door opening and the smell of coffee moving through the cabin. And she knew he was making 2 cups without being asked, the way he made 2 cups every morning now, because she was here, because this was home, and because some things did not need to be said to be completely and irrevocably true. A woman who knows what she's worth does not beg for a place at the table. She pulls up a chair, opens the books, and shows you exactly what has been stolen, and from whom.